Hi everyone, and welcome to the topic Text and Talk. This is going to be a really quick romp through a range of methods of analysis of text and talk, so I'll just get cracking on this one. Maybe I should start by saying when we're talking about text and talk, text can be anything that can be read. So we're thinking generally about film, text as in printed word, images, maybe even a landscape could be read for certain features. Anything that we can, in a way, anything that we derive meaning from that is over and above what we actually see and hear. So thinking in those sorts of terms, and maybe some of that will become obvious as we go on. We can think about text and talk in terms of methods and in terms of analysis. So taking methods, we could be thinking about things such as a life history method where we're interested in the arc or the narrative of somebody's life. We could be thinking in terms of documentary methods. So documentary here meaning analysis of documents themselves. So it might be going into an archive and retrieving a whole lot of material and thinking about how does this make sense in the context in which those particular documents were produced and the content of them. We might be doing interviews with people, so that's our method. So I guess in this sense we can be just talking with someone. We could have structured interviews if we're after some consistent responses to the same question. We could have a less structured interview, an open or unstructured interview where we're allowing the conversation to dominate and the interaction between the interviewer and the participant, guided clearly by some constraints around what the sort of things we're going to be talking about, but nevertheless a much more free-flowing type of thing that isn't trying to get the same sets of information about something. We might be interested in narrative inquiry, that is how narratives are deployed for particular topic areas. So for example, we might be interested in narrative inquiry around the way that veterans talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, for example. The types of storytelling that goes on, the way that metaphor is used, a whole range of things like that. So there's a whole range of methods that we can bring to talking about text and talk, and then I guess those methods are around our purpose and how we're going to collect the data itself. So that's sort of the start of it. I guess the next stage of this is also thinking about approaches to text and talk which are about analysis. How are we going to analyse the material that we collect? And there's a range of options open to us, things like semiotic discourse, textual analysis, conversation analysis, content analysis, discourse analysis, narrative analysis, whole range of things and this is just a selection of some of the possibilities, and so I'm going to talk about some of those today. So, if we're going to talk about semiotic analysis, we're interested in signs. The signs that are deployed in our world and the codes embedded within them and the culture within which those codes operate. So this is I guess, and we're used to that idea of the sign as being composed of both the signifier, the sign itself, the visual representation or the textual representation, the word, and the signified, what is signified by the sign. And we know that we need to have a way of decoding signs, and this is the work of semiotic analysis, and it requires an understanding, or it requires developing understandings of the cultures in which those codes operate. We could have something like a flag, the Australian flag. Already we could talk about this as a sign itself, couldn't we? We understand flags of this type as operating within, as being a code for, that stands in for a nation state. We know that it operates within a culture, and we might say this is a global culture of dividing geographical areas of the world up into nations, and within those national borders, peoples. So that sense of the nation is encoded into the flag. And then we could go further by unpacking, I guess, each of the symbols within a flag itself. That Union Jack, that blue background, the Southern Cross, the Federation Star, and talk about the meaning of the flag itself. But we could also be starting to look at the flag in other contexts, that is, how it works within different cultures. For example, what does the Australian flag mean in terms of national sporting representation, and how is the flag used in those situations? What does it mean? What emotion is engendered by the flag? What is it that's operating in that situation? So in a sporting opening ceremony, for example, of the Commonwealth or Olympic Games, it has particular meanings. And maybe within the Commonwealth Games, a different meaning to within the Olympic Games as well. You know, the cultures within which codes operate vary from time to time, often subtly, but nevertheless vary. An example again of this, and I won't labour this too much, but it's not exactly a sporting arena, but an arena of contest, and I think that's something else we could talk about around flags, the arena of contest, of territorialism, of territorialising, and here's an example from the Cronulla riots in 2005. So we could think about a range of things in which the way that the flag is used in this particular setting, readings of both the ways in which the flag is being used, the situation in which it's being used, other signs that are being used alongside the flag, and so on. Or we could look at another use of the flag in terms of a immigration protest against restricted immigration laws, and in particular in relation to boat arrivals, migrant refugees who might come by boat, and this protest here, looking at the way that the flag is used, what sort of codes are being deployed in terms of using it as a hood, which interrupts our sight, interrupts our vision. How does it work with people who have arms crossed? How might we read this? And so I guess we're looking at the different situations here in which a text, in this case, the text is the Australian flag, and what meaning and does this sign convey? What codes are being used? What does it say about the cultures in which these signs operate? So that's a semiotic analysis. The reading this week, I guess, from McKee talks about textual analysis. And in a sense, all of the things we're talking about this week are textual analysis. But he has a particular way of thinking about textual analysis. It's a post-structural textual analysis. that has a number of theoretical assumptions built into it, some of which we've already explored, I think, in the semiotic analysis, that there are no, a text has no sort of inherent truth in it other than interpretations. So this is approaching texts as meaning conveying things which are open to interpretation because we all are situated differently. So how we might have viewed, for example, that Cronulla riot image may depend on our politics. Perhaps if we're on the far right, not perhaps, if we're on the far right, we would see this as a different type of, as a flag as being a different kind of text, and I guess the image itself as a type of text that will be interpreted differently to somebody who is on the left side of politics. Similarly, I guess with the protest against boat arrivals, refugees coming by boat. So the interpretations that we bring to our textual analysis are situated. They're located both in terms of our own being in the world, who we are, and how we're situated or located within within the nation and within our culture, and as well in terms of our politics, our, if you like, our theoretical location. So it's not about truth so much as interpretations, and I guess one of the things that we do as a researcher is capture, in a sense, note interpretations, and note that the features of the analysis are very contextual. Moving on from McKee, we could, for example, also engage in a narrative inquiry. We're interested in the understanding of what is said within a narrative, within a story arc, if you like, something that holds together in a cohesive way. What's said about it? What's not said? How do specific events get told and incorporated into that story? What storytelling techniques are used, character, metaphor, plot, in terms of speaking about a particular thing? What non-verbal communication do we notice? So narrative inquiry is a quite a different approach. It's not breaking a text up so much as putting it into the context of storytelling and narrative itself. So what we're looking for here is story as a whole, and rather than breaking it up too much, thinking about story in and of itself as a way of conveying meaning and the way that that's done. So while a textual analysis might be looking for themes, and so we might have a number of images or a number of texts from a particular event, and look for common themes and break those texts up into those themes and say where they've appeared and how they've appeared. The narrative inquiry is much more concerned with the, rather than the text at that sort of smaller level, it's more interested in the text as a whole, as a story, and how things sort of pan out in that story itself. Sort of keeping on a theme here of nationalism and readings of nationalism, I thought I might just turn now to talking about content analysis and discourse analysis, and starting with something that I'm familiar with, which is some of the research I've done on the idea of being a local. We're familiar with this type of graffiti at beaches, but it can happen elsewhere as well, the idea of locals only. So a different type of territorialism to nationalism, but yet also I think a local manifestation of nationalism in a sense as well, always connected in terms of a context. Now, we could do content analysis on this idea, and a content analysis is a counting activity. It's getting quantitative rather than qualitative. So, for example, I did a content analysis on the appearance of the word locals in Sydney metropolitan newspapers, and in particular the Sydney Morning Herald and the Daily Telegraph, around the year of the Cronulla riots, so 6 months before and 6 months after. The reason I did that was I was interested in some semi-statistical type of analysis around, okay, what's the average occurrence per month? Actually, I don't think it was per month. I have a funny feeling it was, I went for weeks, per week, of the word locals, Locals, so the S is important, in the Sydney Morning Herald, in the Daily Telegraph, using a database called Factiva, and just finding what I could there. So it's quite simple, and it's sort of drawing up, spreadsheets and counting, and you can do some analysis like that. And so this is a portion of that data graphed either side of the Cronulla riots. And so what we can see here is that the average occurrence in these two newspapers was 17 occurrences per week of the word locals. The reason I chose locals is because locals is always used as a noun. If I chose local, I'd pick up local as an adjective and local as a noun. So paying attention to some of the detail of the language here. And what this research uncovers is that in the week prior and that led up to the Cronulla riot, and on the reporting of the week of the Cronulla riot, there was a spike in the use of the term locals in these papers. And that's the content analysis. It's counting instances, occurrences. So what we might say from this content analysis, just looking at this data, is that there is some connection between the occurrence of, or the use of the word locals, and whatever it is that's going on at Cronulla during this time. So there's the lead up, in which there was a fight at the North Cronulla Surf Club, and that was reported. And then there's the actual riot that occurred the following weekend. And then suddenly after that, back to normal as far as locals goes, their occurrence in the paper. So that's what we could say about using a content analysis. That's sort of what we can say. We might be able to say other things, but there's not too much else we could say. We could note other sort of peaks. So I've noted two peaks here. One was a fight that the fishing broadcaster Rex Hunt got into at Byron, and one that about the Australian Open tennis, where all the locals were out. So I guess we can get a sense of what is some of what's going on here. There's some sort of demarcation of territory, some contest over territory, but really content analysis is just about the counting. If we wanted to go somewhere else with this and get into meaning, then we have to start using some of those other analytical techniques, such as textual analysis, semiotic analysis, or, as I'm going to mention, discourse analysis. So in discourse analysis, and look, this is a term which is used in many contexts and has a range of meanings, and I'm going to use it in a particular meaning today. I'm going to use it in terms of discourse analysis that is called more strictly a critical language study, and in particular it's a method of analysis that Norman Fairclough outlines in a book called Language and Power. So that is, I guess, in terms of thinking about methodology, for this study, that's how I did this research. I could say why Fairclough's critical language study was a good method to use, but it's not saying that others aren't better or worse, but that's not my argument. I'm picking Fairclough because of what he does, and once I've just made that decision and justified it, I can get on with my research, and I'm on a horse, I'm going to ride that one. So what he's interested in is showing up connections between language and power. So that is clearly useful in this situation because there's some contest over place, and it's a contest around power as well. My focus was looking at the word local and underlying issues of power in that. And so what I'm sort of doing here is taking that content analysis, that histogram, and one of the columns in the histogram, and saying, okay, what does this column contain? What are the texts in this column? And what themes can I get from these instances of the use of the word locals in this sense? So I'm interested in ideas of belonging and race in particular. And so clearly this is an issue around language and power. And I guess Fairclough, in his understanding of discourse, is that discourse is about use of language as a social practice that's conditioned by social conventions. Therefore, language both is an expression of social structure, as well as something that produces social structures. It's in a co-constitutive relationship, in other words. Language produces structures, and it gives expression to those structures. So the word locals, I would be arguing in this sense, is giving some expression to social structure around belonging, place, and identity. So I could go to a particular text. The text I have chosen here is this one, Gangs Are the Problem, Cries Locals. So what am I going to do here in terms of this analysis? Well, Fairclough gives me some tools. He has some dimensions of discourse. He talks about the social conditions of production of discourse and interpretation. How a particular discourse comes into being, is produced by our society, and how we interpret it. He talks about processes of production and processes of interpretation of a particular text, and at the middle is the text itself. So, and then connected with these dimensions of discourse, he has 3 stages of analysis: description, interpretation, and explanation. So here I have a text, Gangs Are the Problem, Cries Local. So notice that locals turned up the text, but there's a particular use of local here, which is in the singular. So what I can do then is I can describe this text, and in particular I could describe this use of the word local here. And in doing that, I'd be thinking, okay, I don't know who the local is, but I know who the local is identifying against. It's gangs of some type, and that gangs are a problem. I can describe the text in terms of where it's located in the newspaper article. That is, it's a headline, and therefore it's something that gets noticed. You know, that sense that we read a headline, we make a decision. Do we want to read further? We read the first paragraph. Do we want to read further? We go on. And that's how news articles are created. So we know that the use of the word local in a headline is significant in that sense. It says something about the rest of the article. It sets a tone. That might be all I'm going to say in this description. I might also describe that it's on a particular page of the Daily Telegraph, and it's at that level that I'm going to go to. I'm going to also maybe say something about this idea of local, that it's a noun use of the word local, it's not an adjective use of the word local. So we're talking about a local as opposed to a local person or a local citizen, that sort of thing. So that's in the description. In the interpretation, I'm going to start thinking, okay, so what's the process of production of this? It's written in a Sydney daily newspaper. It's a tabloid newspaper. It comes from the Murdoch press. It's been produced in the context of the Cronulla riot. There's a certain politics that goes along with this that we might start to discern from the article itself and some of the images, a whole range of things which we're going to think about in terms of how this text has been produced through the print media and the print media as a text producing institution. How's this going to be interpreted? Well, it's going to be read by people who read the Daily Telegraph. That might be a certain demographic. It's going to be interpreted in the context of our culture of understanding what it means to be a local, that locals might be Cronulla locals, that they might, well, as we've seen in our content analysis, the locals can also be connected with the nation, as in locals are out of the Australian Open tennis. We're going to have a look at some of the ways in which this is going to be interpreted by somebody who's reading this text. It's going to be, in a way, you know, one of the things about the production of text in the news media is that there's this idea of who it is that you're writing to. There's this ideal reader, or there may be a series of ideal readers, and it's written for that person. So we're going to try and discern some of these ways in which that interpretation is happening. So this is my interpretive stage of the analysis. And the next thing I'm going to do is go a little bit wider and say, okay, what are the social conditions for the production of this text? And how do we explain it? And here I'm going to be thinking in terms of nationalism, perhaps, the role of religion. So we were getting into this time after September 11 of anti-Muslim sentiments and the connection of anti-Muslim sentiments with nationalism, the connection of people of Middle Eastern background with and how that relates with nationalism and so on. So we get both some ways in which this idea of the local as a discursive formation, if you like, is produced, and the way in which the idea of the local is read, both in terms of local belonging but in terms of national belonging as well. So that's an example of discourse analysis. There you go. That's a range of ways of thinking about text and talk, and I think that's enough for the day. The phone's ringing. Got to go. Okay, bye-bye.